42% of both Republicans and Democrats regarded the other party as downright evil.
Well, Dr. Ken Barish, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I really do.
Thank you for inviting me, Vinny. I'm very happy to be having this conversation.
Yeah. It's timely. I mean, I guess it's always timely, the topic we touched on, right? I mean, bridging our political divide, not exactly an easy task. I don't think anyone's ever done it. I don't know, but it's worthy of a discussion. That's for sure. I mean, think this, and I want to get into your book, and I think what you had sent me, is that more or less an executive summary of your book? Those 8
I
principles.
sent you some different op-eds that I've written, and
The one that had the 8 principles in it, was that, what was that
well,
from?
there were two. There were two op-eds that I wrote
Yep.
that summarize the 8 principles. Yeah, so you can consider that an executive summary. Sure.
Okay. Yeah, it seemed to me, just from reading some of the stuff about your book, it seemed like a really good top level, kind of top to bottom. But again, so I think we'll dig into that. But I guess before we get started, maybe a little intro on who you are.
Okay. Well, my name is Ken Barish. I am a psychologist. I'm a clinical professor of psychology at the Weill Cornell Medical College. I live and work outside of New York City. And I have been a working child and family therapist for over 4 decades. That's my primary gig. I'm a therapist. And a lot of the principles that I'm going to talk about are really based on the work that I've done for many years with children and families. I'm on the faculty of 2 different psychoanalytic institutes here in the New York area. And I'm also a visiting professor at Tongji Medical College in Wuhan, China, where I go every year for a week or so to teach.
Oh, very cool.
So, and in my spare time, I play jazz trumpet, which has been an interest and a serious amateur interest of mine since I was 10 years old.
Oh, very could Neat.
So that's me.
Neat. So how did you get, I guess, what was the genesis of this book? How did you feel compelled to write a book like this?
So the topics in this book have been an interest of mine actually since I was in college. Since college, I've been interested in political psychology, specifically a few basic questions. One of the things I noticed in college, which was late 60s, early 70s, is that conservatives tended to be conservative on different issues, and liberals tended to be liberal on different issues, right? Conservatives tend to be hawkish at that time, and mostly throughout my life, hawkish on questions of foreign policy, valued increased military spending, and less social welfare spending. Liberals were the opposite. Liberals opposed the war in Vietnam, for example, and wanted increased social welfare spending. So my first thought is, how do these things or why do these things go together? And now we have many more issues. So you take Supreme Court justices. The conservatives are conservative on almost all issues. Liberals are liberal on almost all issues, but the issues are very different, right? So what does gun control have to do with abortion? What does either of those have to do with taxes? Right. So that was the question that that puzzled me, and so I did over the years. A lot of people have researched this. There's been a lot of research and writing on this. There are different theories, and there's a lot of data on this. So that was the first question that I wanted to answer for myself. Then that led to a second question: why do we become liberal or conservative? I have members of my family who are conservative. I have members of my family who are liberal. Why do we disagree? That was really the basic question. Why do we disagree? What are our disagreements really all about? And then, more recently, that moved into what is actually a much more important question. which is, how can we talk together? Why do family members talk and discuss politics, argue about politics, debate about politics for decades and never change their minds? Except sometimes they do. And then why? So, and then that led to trying to bring together my experience as a therapist, working with families, trying to help families talk together with less hostility and contempt, and apply those principles to political discussion. And that seemed, as you said, very timely. That seemed like a very important thing to do because mostly our political discussions are terrible. They're not discussions at all, right? They are debates in which no one is really listening to the other person. And the work I do on a daily basis, my day job, is to help people listen to each other.
Mm.
So that's the genesis of the book.
Mm. Well, I mean, it could not be more. I mean, I always, and I think I've said this before. You know, I feel like Capitol Hill should be full of psychologists, just understanding, because if the whole crux of it is how others think and how you think and how we think, and it's
Right.
just everything you just kind of broke through. I hope there's that level of fascination on Capitol Hill, except for let's just win on both sides, right? Which is, unfortunately, it feels like it's just a ladder. Let's just win at all costs. And like you said,
Yep.
all through a lot of your writing here, and it gets, not to get too far ahead of the principles, but dialogue, not debate. But
Yes.
everything we hear, everything is debate, right? We have
Dialogue, not
actual debates are part of our political process. It's called a debate. So, and the next day, it's like, who won the debate? Not, hey, didn't you enjoy that conversation in which both parties articulated their position on X, Y, Z? That's not fun. That's not exciting.
that
Right?
is maybe that is the perhaps the central point in the
Mm.
book. There's a lot more about how to do that. But a teacher of mine in graduate school wrote a book which he called The Magic of Dialogue. And he made this distinction between a dialogue and a debate. And many people don't understand it. They think they're having a dialogue, but they're really having a debate. Because in dialogue, you're trying to, in a debate, you want to win, right? You want to make your points, um, and hopefully they'll be convincing, which they really don't change people's minds. But in a dialogue, it's a different premise. The different premise is, what can I learn from this person? If Vinny disagrees with me, what can I learn from him? And is it possible for together we can arrive actually at a better understanding? How can each of our opinions or thinking improve the other? So it's a very different kind of conversation. Just to give you one example, I have a colleague who analyzed a debate or just conversation, they called it, between two college professors on the issue of gun control. And the professors took 91 conversational turns. So they each spoke about 45 times. And in only one turn between the two of them did they mention something other than what their opinion was. Did they actually uh, say, "This is my concern. What is your concern?" So that's and that's what our debates are like, right? There's very little listening, and it's just making points, repeating slogans. I should say that there are a lot of people who actually do this. It's not that it's there are people in Washington, outside Washington, who are really interested in dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't get the most airtime.
Yeah, there's no rah rah behind. I mean, I think what if I did see. I think during this last election cycle, at least some of the candidates, at least I think I saw, started to entertain that long form podcast thing.
Yeah,
Which I think the right did it way more than the left. Just given you can break down that as to why. But if both parties started doing that more, I would imagine. I mean, it's more time, right? It's definitely more time consuming. But I just think, at least how we work in this country, we get a non talking point version of what this person thinks about whatever the issue is, right?
yeah,
And just that, and it's funny too. Every time whether someone that I've maybe had some preconceived notions about based on the 2-second clips you saw on Fox News or 3-second clip you saw on MSNBC or CNN or wherever it was, you start forming these opinions, right? Because the media is not unbiased at all in either case, and you start forming these opinions even subconsciously. And I noticed when I would see a candidate in any sort of long form where they start going, yeah, that's a tough one, and they start reflecting on why maybe they came to that opinion and some of their personal experiences, maybe pain and trauma as a kid. You start to, now it may not change your opinion on the particular, policy but it immediately gives you that empathy. You're like, oh, I understand why they came to that conclusion. They're not just evil, or I'm here, but they're there, but gosh, I see why they got there. And I can't imagine having gotten there through the journey that it took, so but it took a 2-hour conversation on a podcast for me to get to that, and I just don't think the system's set up to it's just,
But
how do you
as
monetize that? How do you, unfortunately,
well,
it's tough.
I have no idea how to monetize it, but it's something as individuals we can do. And if we
Yeah.
can do it more as individuals, then maybe other people will pick it up. But I think the point you made is very good. The point of a dialogue is not to get the other person to agree with you, but to understand where they're coming from. As
Mm-hmm.
we used to say back in my day, um, and and even that small amount of empathy that you can understand where they're coming from changes the tone of the debate. And that's one of the things we certainly need to if we're going to debate, at least we can change the tone of the debate
Mm-hmm.
because you're talking to someone who you um, who you don't regard as evil.
Right.
There's
Right.
this famous poll that back about 5 years ago that 42% of both Republicans and Democrats regarded the other party as downright evil.
Mm.
Right? And that's very different. Now that's been happening for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Um, I can remember back in, I think it was when Al Gore was running for vice president,
Mm-hmm.
1992, and in
Yeah.
his acceptance speech, he said of his Republican opponents, he says, "Don't get me wrong, they're not bad people, but their policies are not good for America." Well, that's very different than the tone we have now, right?
Right. Yeah.
George W. Bush said similar things,
Yeah.
right? Um, but the tone has changed over the last couple of decades, um, uh, and and that's really very bad
Yeah.
for the
And that's what worries me, because I always kind of try to zoom out and say, oh, every generation thinks X, right? Every generation thinks it's the worst it's ever been, right? But and I think to zoom out and see the objective nature of it, I think the trajectory is in the wrong way. It is in the wrong direction, like 100, like, and the example you just used, I think is gives that context, because if you look back, the debates were much more civil, right? That there was two parties saying, no, this is better for the American people. No, this is better for the American people. But it wasn't, it wasn't so much othering of the other side, right? And I
yes,
think, and I think I put in my notes I sent you, that scares me to my core, because, if you look at how all these atrocities have happened around the world, right? There's always that, you need a war, right? You need you need an other. So these dictators create, very brilliantly, even though they're such, such malintent with it, but it's brilliant in the way they really brainwash folks to think, okay, that group, whatever is the other. So they're evil,
yeah,
they're inhumane, and
mhm,
then humans, well-meaning humans, can end up doing horrific things
yes,
as soon as you
absolutely,
other. So that in and of itself, I think, it's just a scary thing, that what you just said, that 42% quote, that is, even if it's half that is scary, that we've come this far.
yeah. No,
That's
I agree with
scary.
everything you said. Dehumanizing
Mm,
other people leads leaves us open to all kinds of cruelty
mm,
yeah, and even atrocities.
mm. Yeah. And it doesn't, yeah. And yeah,
That's
I
it. As
mean,
unfortunately, that is such a consistent feature of human history.
yep. Yep. Yeah. And what I'm worried about is that at some point, I mean, every great empire falls, right? everyone has in history. We're the longest running one, to my knowledge. That thing, soft times create soft men, soft men create hard times. That whole cycle,
Mm-hmm.
which I guess I'm not optimistic. I'd love to be, but I would love, and I want to read you my quote later that I'll get your take on it, but it doesn't
Okay.
really end optimistically. It's just because I just don't, you got to follow where the trends are going. I still have hope, but I just want, you need to see like a fundamental shift in the system or the incentives, which incentives, what does Charlie Munger say? Show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. If
Yeah.
this incentives is just power and I don't know, I just don't
I don't
see.
know. I think I'm probably a little bit more optimistic than you, but I really
Good,
don't. I
please
don't
bring
know.
me over.
Well, so I don't know whether to be optimistic or not, but I do believe in that we should be hopeful and we should find ways um, to talk together more respectfully. There are certain the kind of conversations, I call them better political conversations, that and the principles that I advocate are difficult.
Yeah.
They require willingness. Right? If you're not willing, then you've got nothing. They require honesty,
Yep.
right? And then they require a lot of discipline because the temptation to debate and is so ingrained in us.
Hmm.
I say to people that these principles have been um, the organizing framework for the work that I do as a family therapist for over 40 years, and I still find it hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But if we're aware of it, and if we can do it some of the time, we can't do it all the time, but
Right.
if we can
Right.
do it some of the time, that makes a major change. So a small change can have a large effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll stumble, right? We'll stumble and fail, but if we keep getting try to back to the to this North Star, if you will, I think you're right. You don't have to have it perfect, but at least that, those would be the rails, these 8 principles. And I do want to run through them because as we're talking, I'm
Sure.
like, the listeners have to hear these 8, and we'll touch on it. And I can't imagine anyone would disagree with any of them. Like you said, I think the hard part would be implementing them and actually,
Yes.
but conceptually, theoretically, we're like, yeah, absolutely, of course, then that
Well,
all makes sense.
I don't think people will disagree with them, but I think that people actually don't. Yes, they're difficult to implement, but they also have to be understood. I've had conversations
Yeah.
with very reasonable people, and uh, they said, "Yeah, we're having a dialogue now." I said, "No, we're not. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
this is not a dialogue, right? They
Yeah.
don't really. People agree with them, but don't really fully understand how to do this."
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've heard some folks say that to me. We had a good conversation, and I said to them, eh, "No, you were just waiting for me to stop talking, and then so you
Yes,
could make your point every single time. Yes, you were cordial and you didn't speak over me, but you weren't in it to listen and understand my point. You were just waiting for the sound waves to stop coming out of my mouth, so you can make sound waves out of your mouth, and we just went in the circle. That's not a dialogue.
that
That's right.
that is the standard conversation, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That
exactly.
is the
Yeah.
standard conversation for almost everybody.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with my wife. Sometimes we'll get into that mode. I'm like, wait a minute, we're both a little emotionally charged here. Let's actually go. We got to let the kids do the thing, and we'll go for a walk when we actually have the mental capacity and willingness to actually hear each other. And my gosh, it's a little bit harder at the beginning, but it makes the world of difference through the middle and the end. It really, really does. But I feel like our default, to your point earlier, it's kind of not our default. Our default is to do the other thing. So
Yes,
it does take
exactly.
work, right? So it's like,
It
so
takes work.
yeah. Anyway, so I do want to run through them because I think
Okay,
these. So
sure.
you got what, 8 principles? So principles of constructive dialogue. So first one you got is a language of dignity and respect. Seems obvious. Fully agree there, but what do you mean by that?
Um, so uh, it goes back to what I said before. To the person you're talking to um, is not a bad person, right? To go into it with the assumption that they're not a bad person, but there will be moments where we will treat somebody as if their feelings don't matter. Well,
Mm,
that's not an affirmation of dignity. That's not. treating them with dignity and respect. Dignity means their experiences and their feelings matter. And then if we slip and we begin to get into a kind of thing where we're really not listening,
Mm-hmm.
we have to be aware of that. So that's it. These when we are subtly insulting someone, right? That's when conversations immediately break down. But if we're aware of that and we repair that,
Yeah.
if we repair those violations of dignity, then we can get back on track.
Mm.
This principle comes from people who do really, really difficult work, like trying to negotiate truces in different parts of the world,
Mm.
in Europe or in South America. And this is what they find. They find that the discussions, when someone feels a violation of dignity, that they've been spoken to as if they don't matter,
Yeah.
then uh, everything breaks down.
Mm. Yeah, and not
So
to get too political, whatever side you're on, but the current, I would say, political candidates have kind of not given a good example of language of dignity and respect, right? On both sides, right? It's just a shouting match. It's regardless of the policy, whatever they're talking about. There's just it's a vitriol. It's like children. It's childish. It's not professional. I think that should be the default, and then you argue and discuss the topics and the policies. It's like I
right.
don't know. It's just this like dignity is not. I don't know. We're not being led by example there,
Yes,
unfortunately.
I agree that the language of political discussions now would be unthinkable when I was growing up.
Yeah.
The language that people use to describe their opponents, and on this, I think it's more on one side than the other. You'll have to
Yeah.
guess which side I think, but it's much more on one side than the other. It would be just not imaginable,
Yeah.
um, and in that context, it's very hard to have a dialogue.
Yeah.
But it's not everyone talks this way, and not everyone thinks their opponents are evil.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There is also a large group that actually want parties to compromise. They are called the exhausted majority.
Yeah. Right. 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 Yep. Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so, if there is a majority of people who are really exhausted by this
Mm-hmm.
and don't believe the dehumanizing language that people use, but even then, if people are using a dehumanizing language, right, um, we still have to try and have some empathy. Where are they coming from?
Right.
What are their? We'll get to this. What are their stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and why is this? Why has this happened?
Yeah. Well, perfect segue. Principle number 2: learn someone's personal story.
Yeah.
Yep.
So um, uh, we usually debate ideas or policies. We discuss
Mm-hmm.
ideas or policies, but our ideas begin with stories, right? There are different kinds of stories. Uh, as I was reading about different political sources, different political opinions, they all come from someone's story, right? So some of the stories that really animate us now have to do with resentment. There are stories of resentment, but there are also stories of patriotism. Right? There are stories of injustice. Right? Um, that's where many ideas begin, with a story of injustice. Another story, though, begins with disillusionment. Disillusionment is such
Mm.
a powerful force in people um, uh, moving from one side to the other, and seeing the other as all bad.
Mm.
Um, so if we listen to the stories of people's lives, um, uh, if someone has spent time in the military, that's an important story in their life, and that's going to lead to certain values and concerns um, and aspirations that are going to be a core source of their political opinions.
Yeah. 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 Personal example there. And I've said this a million times, apologize for the listeners, but I was having a conversation with somebody. I think maybe I've named her in the past, but I'll just pretend I didn't. I don't remember if I called her up. But anyway, it's a person about, it was pro-life, pro-choice. And
Mm-hmm.
the conversation was obviously, this is a very, I mean, it's a passionate conversation
Right.
for, you know, for the longest time. And, you know, the way she articulated her pro-choice position, I'll never forget, right? It was just because this is a loving grandmother that I'm talking to, by the way, who I couldn't imagine how, you know, I couldn't imagine how she would arrive there. So and this was many years ago. I would like to think I'm a lot more mature now to understand some of the nuances. But anyway, at the time, you know, the way she articulated it was very much like it was to, you know, a personal story that she shared about unwanted children being brought into this world and having to be brought up in an environment where they really weren't wanted. And just as opposed, right, so with what was weighing on her to you know, it wasn't a, you know, in my head and some back recesses of my brain back then, I'm thinking, oh, baby killer, right? Because that's the theme.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
what an immature way to stamp someone in my, you know, in hindsight, what
Yeah.
an
No.
immature way to look at it, right? No, how about this like immensely loving woman who has
Yes.
who has, you know, daughters, sons, grandchildren, granddaughters, literally has a lifetime of treating children with the absolute most love you could possibly, you know, get to. And then to have her say that she's pro-choice, but then hearing her, I couldn't, it was cognitive dissonance for me. I couldn't understand it. And then
Uh-huh.
hearing her talk about, you know, and it took me many years to just, I'll hear something and I'll churn on it for years. That's just, my brain works that way. And
Mm-hmm.
it's exhausting in there. That's all I'll say. But over the, you know, it finally took me a while, and gosh, maybe it was 10 years after I said, oh, I remember that conversation. And, you know, her position was so rooted in having such trauma from her
Right.
experience of
And
loving unwanted children, of maybe being one herself in a family that didn't want her. And so that just, for me, just changed, you know, everything about not just that issue, or not even that issue at all. I can't, you know, I won't even get into if I changed my mind or not, but just to understand just how someone could arrive at their position based on, to your principle too here, their personal story is so darn important.
I think that's important. It's also true on the pro-life side. You
Mm-hmm.
listen to the stories that convince someone
Yeah.
that abortion is immoral, and this to them is an absolute moral um, certainty or moral question, but understand the personal story that leads to that belief.
Mm.
You know, people who are pro-choice and pro-life have had these kinds of discussions, um, and an interesting thing happens. They talk together over many years, and they don't change their opinions. People who start out pro-life remain pro-life. People who start out pro-choice remain pro-choice, but they become friends.
Mm. Yeah. Right.
So that's the difference there, because there's a gut feeling that really animates our political
Mm-hmm.
opinions.
Right.
So it just to a pro-life person, abortion just feels fundamentally
Mm.
wrong,
Right.
fundamentally wrong, and that feeling may never really go away. But to a
Yeah.
person who's pro-choice, um, uh, the the compassion for a young woman who has become pregnant is also a feeling,
Right.
or the experience you talked about of unwanted children is a feeling
Mm.
that is deeply rooted, and that feeling may not change, but we can understand each other's personal stories.
Yep. No, exactly. Principle 3, empathy and moral imagination. Ooh, moral imagination. I like that one.
Uh, Moral imagination. Empathy is moral imagination.
Mm.
Empathy is trying to put yourself in the life circumstances of another person and see that um, well, as we colloquially say, right, to walk a mile in their shoes.
Mm.
It's not an easy thing to do. But it is possible, and it's possible for all of us, right? Um, and but it takes a um, a willingness and an effort. So there are politicians. All right. So here, the best example of this is the change in the country about attitudes towards gay people. When I was growing up, um, the dominant opinion, even among liberals, was that gay people were not really deserving of any rights.
Hmm.
That they were others, as you said.
Right.
They were different. Over the course of my lifetime, that has changed dramatically, to the point where most Americans now accept uh, marriage equality, gay marriage.
Mhm.
Um, and that has come from getting to know gay people, right?
Right.
That's actually what's happened on television, in movies, and in our personal lives.
Right.
Um, um, and to then not see gay people as others, but it wasn't the way it was in the
Yeah.
1960s. It simply wasn't. So, um, and that's an act of moral imagination, to get
Mm.
away from our personal experience, our personal point of view, and to actually try and understand the experience of someone else
Mm.
and see them as like us and not other.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. There's no better way to. I mean, the old saying, right? Walk a mile in someone's moccasins, or whatever. Right? Just the
Mm-hmm.
idea, if you get to know someone, experience their side, it's tough to other them at that point, right? It really
Yeah,
is. Um, Principle 4, from debate to dialogue. I think we touched on this one. We talked about this quite a bit, actually. Yeah, I mean, if we had more dialogue and less debating, I certainly think that would help. I just don't. The problem is, again, if you just strictly look at politics, well, I guess we should separate it, right? Because originally, when I read this, I said, well, the system will never allow for that because the whole point is to have political debates and not political dialogues. But that doesn't mean we as people, like just okay, if you take the political candidates out of it, can't the rest of us, which is 99.9999% of us, the non-politicians, can't we always have dialogue and not debate? You know what
yeah.
I mean? We're
No,
not
and
on stage.
yeah, we're not going to have presidential dialogues instead of presidential
Right,
debate,
right, right.
right?
Exactly.
Where
Yeah.
that's
Right.
not going to happen. However, the politicians can go out there and go to, if it's a Democrat, go to a Republican district, and a Republican go to a Democrat district and say, "Hey, I want to
Mm,
understand you better, how you feel. I want to listen to you." And people do that, right?
mm,
So the politicians actually can do that, and we can do that. But they have to understand the difference between a dialogue and debate. I think people really don't understand this often enough.
yeah.
Right? And even if we cannot have a full dialogue, moments of dialogue, that's where my hopefulness comes in. Right? We don't have to be able to have to sustain a dialogue, which is really difficult to do. But if we have moments of dialogue, the tone of the conversation changes.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Principle 5, from opinions to concerns. Yeah, I
Yeah,
like this. Yeah, you think you said an opinion is a conclusion. You said when we debate opinions, we are beginning at what should be the end. I really like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this comes from actually my work with families,
Mm,
um, and uh, there uh, there are programs that are developed to help families talk together, parents and children and couples talk together in a more productive way.
mm,
Um, Ross Green and Stuart Ablon at Harvard developed this program, and there are others that are similar. Michael Mascolo has a program that's very similar. Um, and the uh, the basic premise is that in families, we make pronouncements. An opinion is a pronouncement. Right?
Mm.
So a child will say, if it's time to go to school or going to a family gathering that they don't want to go to, the child says, "I'm not going." Well, that's a pronouncement. That's an
Right.
opinion, right? And of course, the parent says, "Yes, you
Yes, you
are."
are.
Yes, you are, which is also a
Said
pronouncement.
it 3 times this morning. Yep.
Okay, uh, but and that gets nowhere, right?
Right.
That's just a power struggle, right?
Yep. Yep.
Um, but we can do it differently. If we ask a child, um, "Why don't you want to go? What is your concern?" It's a totally different conversation. It's a new ballgame. So this child is likely to say, "I'm going to feel left out.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be bored," they'll say. "There won't be anything to do. This other child is going to be mean to me." There's a whole range of things that kids can say
Right.
that lead up to the pronouncement, "I'm not going," right? So that's an example of what I'm saying. "I'm not going" is the end. That's a
In the end.
conclusion,
Oh.
right?
Mm.
The concerns could be, "I'm going to be anxious. I'm going to feel embarrassed. I'm going to be left out." All of these things, right? Um, and then that opens up a new form of discussion. Uh, the parent can then say, um, once they have listened to the child's concern, they can express empathy. "Oh, I get it. I understand that. I understand that you're worried that you might feel left out. I
Mm.
understand even that you might have more fun staying here and playing video games on your computer. I understand that." But then they could express their concerns. Concern was, "Well, but it's important because grandparents are waiting and expecting you, or it's important for kids to go to school, or it's important to um, uh, be responsible. The kids on your team are waiting for you." So that's an expression of parents'
Mm.
concerns. Again, it's not just an opinion. An opinion is, "No, you have to go,"
Right. Right.
right? And then the next part of it is even better. Parents say, "Well, how do you think we can solve this problem?" So the child is now not thinking about what they can get away with or whether the parents are going to punish them or not. They're actually thinking about, "I have this feeling, my parents have this concern, how can we solve the problem?" And that is a very, very different kind of conversation. And we don't have that very often.
Mm.
We debate. That's why I say we debate opinions. "I'm
Yeah.
going." "No, I'm not going." We discuss concerns.
Concerns. Mm.
"I'm going to feel left out." "Oh, if you're afraid you're going to feel left out, here's something that we can do about
I like
that.
that.
So that's the difference between um, an opinion and a concern.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, we debate opinions, we discuss concerns. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Now, at some point with kids, though, you do have to reach a point where, okay, we heard you out, but now we had the dialogue. We're 5 minutes late already. We got to go, and you're going.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's different. It's still very different.
Yeah, you're
Uh,
right. You gave them a little, and I got to give my wife all the credit in the world. I just saying this, I'm smirking. She's going to listen to this because she's really on top of this stuff. And she and I, we're a little tangent here, but we have like a little push pull balance where I'm more from the old school. I mean, I was growing up with kind of this, which you got to prune the family tree, and I'm pruning some of that. But there's some good in that, like, hey, you can't give the kid full autonomy, but a little bit of that conversation to have their ownership and having them weigh in does go a long, long, long way. 100% agree with you. I think the
and
problem
it
comes
goes
in where, oh, go ahead,
because
go ahead.
it begins the next conversation differently.
Yeah,
So let's
right.
say it's a family gathering that the child doesn't want to go to. They're afraid they're going to be left out. We say, "Okay, I understand your concern, but we do have to go because people are waiting for us." But then
Mm-hmm.
the next time or later that night, let's
Yeah.
talk about this so that the next time something comes up, we can figure out something.
Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
now I understand how you feel and you understand how I feel. And it begins an entirely different kind of conversation. And I will
Yeah.
tell you that when parents do this, um, family relationships improve, kids begin to behave better.
Mm.
We don't get kids to behave better by we don't doesn't work very well to say here's the rule and here's the consequence.
Right. Right. Right.
That's your old school, and it's
Yep.
probably everybody's old school.
No.
But
Yep. Yep.
problem, Vinny, is it doesn't work.
I
Um,
100% agree with
but
that. Yeah. I used to
if we
hear
do,
you're doing it. I'm the boss, and that's why. That's what I would hear. It's like,
yeah,
okay, well, that doesn't. That's a
once in
quick.
a while, I'm not.
It's like,
Listen, I'm a little bit old school myself. Once in a while, you have to do that, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
If it's don't run
And
in the street, okay, maybe we can explain that, but at some point, no, I agree with you that I've used that analogy a lot where I'm the boss, and that's why, and it's like, okay, and then there was
now,
hitting, and it's like, okay, that maybe solve the immediate 2 second solution, but that doesn't long term. That's just not a good strategy. I'm fully aware. I mean, I'm
it's
fully on.
not a good strategy at all because it doesn't teach them anything. So
Right,
yes,
right, right.
again, so I'm the boss,
Yeah,
and here's why it's important for you to do this.
right.
It's important for you to do this because you have a responsibility to the other members of your team. It's important for you to do this
Right.
because doing well in school is important. And if you're having problems, we can always talk about it. It's important for you to do this because we should give them the reasons,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
So that they can understand the reasons, and we can have you can have a whole different kind of conversation. You can tell
Mm,
your personal story to your kids.
yeah. Yeah.
Say, when I was growing up, Grandma and Grandpa said this, but I came to understand things a little differently as I got older, and all of those kinds of conversations. And then kids are going to listen,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Rather than just get defiant.
Yeah. No,
Okay, so we
100%.
see we moved
Yeah.
away from politics to families. This is my thing. So
Yeah.
to
Yeah. I was
try
gonna
and
say this is just in your
take the
wheelhouse. So yeah.
understandings that you
Yeah.
can get from having better family discussions and apply them to having better political
Yeah. I
discussions.
mean, directly applicable. 100%. Absolutely. Unfortunately, in the political realm, sometimes they act just like they're 8-year-olds. But
Yeah,
um, all right. Principle 6: intellectual charity.
yeah.
Ooh.
Um, not a. We have to accept the best version
Mm,
of another person's ideas, and instead of a caricature, we make a caricature.
right.
When I hear often when I hear Republicans talking about Democrats or Democrats talking about Republican ideas, they're not. Uh, um, they're discussing um, a version of the idea that just isn't true.
Right.
And of course, if you're saying something that's about the other person that's just not true, well, then you can't have any dialogue, right?
Right. Each side just straw mans the other side's position,
Right.
and then then okay. Well, in both, I don't care what policy or the conversation you're having, you can always there's always a straw man version of whatever you're defending.
Right.
And if the other
Right.
person is going to, that's why I always look at these debates or these conversations, and there's so much data out there. It's you could easily say, one's arguing for this is going to be the best, this is going to decrease taxes for the middle class, and the other side
Mhm.
says blah blah blah. Well, no, this is going to increase taxes for the middle class, and a lot of times they're both right, but they're
Mhm.
straw manning each other's example or policy or position. So it's like, yeah, there's so much data, and all they're doing is trying to straw man each side. So they pick the most ridiculous or the the version or the use case, the instance, or the real world example of your policy that's going to make it seem ridiculous, which
Uh,
always exists on both sides, right? You could take any policy and just take it to its, illogical conclusion and say, well, see, that's why it's broken. It's like, but that's not, that's a, it's,
yeah. It's such a hard uh, ingrained tendency for us to do that. Again, it comes out of wanting to win a debate.
yeah,
Because if we want to win a debate and we make the other person's ideas seem ridiculous, then we're likely more likely to feel like we have won the debate. So it again it comes from that difference between dialogue and debate. If you want to win, Then you make a caricature out of the other person's ideas and try and convince somebody
Mm-hmm.
that the caricature is true when in fact it's not. And this happens all the time.
Mm.
Uh, the more partisan people become, the more they do this,
Mm.
right? Because and partisanship just leads to wanting to win, as you started with. But it even happens, by the way, in science. So there are scientists who've written about this, and that's the way scientists sometimes debate, and that also doesn't really get anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
People never change their minds. So
Mm.
these are kind of one of the points I make is that all of these things, liberal and conservative, and all the principles of having understanding, happen outside of politics as well. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just politics. This is how we seem. It's worse in politics, but this is how we seem to need to think.
Yeah. Yeah. Politics just seems to shine a magnifying glass on it, but you're
Yep.
right. Yeah. Uh, all right. We're on 7 of 8 here. Intellectual humility.
Yeah.
God, how dare you? Humility. We
So,
don't do that.
well, I'm talking about humility even more than the normal sense,
Mm.
right? The usual sense is um, humility means accept the fact that you might be wrong, accept the fact that you're not, that someone else may know more than you do,
Mm-hmm.
that your opinion might be wrong, and that's all true, and we should do that. But I'm actually asking more, and that is that to recognize that every ideology, every conviction or belief has limits.
Yeah.
So if you're a conservative and you believe in the principle of limited government, small government, which is a core conviction among conservatives, I think
Yep.
I'm not creating a caricature. That is
Sure.
a
Yeah. Yep.
belief. But what are the limits of that belief? Right? When is government necessary and helpful?
Right.
Rather than saying I believe in limited government. Um, so what are the exceptions?
Mm-hmm.
When is government helpful? Same on all issues.
Right.
We should have a certain humility about the limits of our beliefs.
Mm. Right.
So and we should acknowledge that there are other perspectives that we may not have considered, and we should have therefore less certainty.
Mm. Yeah. 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 What is that effect where you don't like really dumb people don't know they're dumb?
Oh yeah,
Dunning Kruger? No, is it Dunning Kruger?
Dunning-Kruger. Yeah, Dunning-Kruger.
Yeah. It reminds me of that in a sense where I know saying dumb people don't know they're dumb is a crass way of saying it, but I think there's a lot of data behind that, right? This at some IQ level, there's not an awareness to know what you don't know, so you're overly confident in things you don't know because you don't know them,
Yeah, I
right?
don't know whether it has to do with someone being dumb or not dumb. I think it's true for all of us. I think that
Maybe it's more of a maybe it's not an IQ, maybe it's more of a self awareness thing or a trait
yeah,
thing or.
it's more of a self-awareness thing. I think
Mm.
I don't know that research in detail, but
Yeah, I
you
think
know,
I think Dunning Kruger is actually based on IQ, where you have to have some intellectual quotient to some degree to at least be able to comprehend the fact that you may not know about a certain topic or something. It's just fascinating, and I'm no expert in it either. I just read it a couple times, so maybe I shouldn't. But I did think it was IQ based, but I could be wrong about that. So, but
yeah,
either way, self awareness, regardless of IQ, I think would apply across the spectrum. So if you're
self-awareness and the awareness that there are other perspectives we may not have considered.
mm,
Right?
yeah.
That there are philosophers that have called this idea perspectivism.
Mm.
That the truth, the more different perspectives you have about any problem, the closer you're going to get to the truth.
Mm.
I was talking with a colleague of mine, a good friend of mine, who said, "Yeah, I know what you're talking about." So you go to the museum and you're looking at a sculpture, and if you just stay in one position and look at the sculpture, all right, you'll see a lot of it. You'll see a lot of details.
Mm.
But if you really want to appreciate the sculpture, you got to walk around it.
Yeah.
You
I like
actually
that.
have
Yeah,
to
yeah.
see, what does it look like from this point of view?
Yeah.
What does it look like from this point of view? So that's a very
Mm.
concrete way of saying that there are many different points of view, and we have to um, we have to um, have that awareness that there might be another point of view.
Mm.
If we adamant in our point of view and don't consider with intellectual charity, these things go
Mm.
together. Intellectual charity and humility go together.
Yep.
Um, then uh, we're not going to really we're not going to be able to talk to each other.
Yeah, it's funny. I said this on the podcast before, and one of the things I found out after starting this podcast is it's allowed me to, it's challenged so many things I thought I knew, so many
Mm.
things, so many things, which is really cool, right? And I've said it before. It's like at 20, well, when I became 30, I was looking back. I looked back at myself when I was 20 and said, "Man, I was an idiot." Then when I was 40, I looked back at myself at 30 and I'm like, "Wow, I was an idiot." An idiot in ways like
Yeah.
my perception of life and things that I thought were like just that. And I started to, so it was around maybe late 30s or close to 40. I started to say I'm 47. I'll be 48 now. Gosh, I forget. Anyway, I caught it maybe say 8-ish years ago where I said, okay, I know the pattern. So be humble because you're an idiot right now, and stop, and just ask more questions than and just kind of try to get ahead of that and not be so confident everything about a subject, or you have it figured out. So I'm hoping I probably caught it later than I would like to, but yeah, that humility, intellectual humility is you nailed it. I love that one. That's one of my personal favorites. Yeah.
Well, I
Oh,
had
but it's hard though.
similar
It's so hard.
experiences. I'm a lot older than you, but I had similar experiences when I was young. I can still remember feeling the same thing.
Mm.
I was an idiot about that, right? So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then it stayed with me. Okay, so if I was an idiot then, maybe I should have a little bit more humility now.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Good stuff. All right. Last one. Last but not least, from ideology to pragmatism. Ooh, is a good one here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ideology to pragmatism.
So pragmatism is the idea. Pragmatism again is a slightly different sense of the word. We often say, well, you have to be pragmatic. And what we mean by that is you have to be willing to compromise or recognize, well, we can only accomplish so much at one time. That's what being pragmatic means. But I'm really talking about pragmatism in a different sense.
Hmm.
Pragmatism means we have to look at actually what works
Right.
and move away from an abstract principle and say what works. So pragmatism means we're going to be pragmatic. We identify a common concern and then say, what do we know about how to solve this problem?
Mm.
Um, and so pragmatism is continues asking questions.
Mm.
Uh, in what cases? You have an idea, let's say you believe in lower taxes, okay? In what cases are lower taxes better? In what cases are higher taxes better?
Right.
That's a pragmatic question, not an ideological question. Right? Um, it, so, in what cases? To what extent?
Mm.
Right? Who is this? It's based on the principle that every policy is going to have some good effects and some bad effects. Going to help some people and not help others. So pragmatism is really scientific.
Mm-hmm.
It's trying to be more scientific and less ideological.
Mm.
So that's and I believe that's a better way for us to go forward. And there are problems in American society that we actually do have common concerns, and we can look
Sure. Yeah.
at from a pragmatic point of view. And if we look at it from a pragmatic point of view, um, there's possibility of finding common ground.
Mm. Well, what a way to bring it home. So yeah, I mean, these 8 principles, like I said, I don't think anyone could disagree with them. I mean, they lay out a fantastic framework. They should put them up on. They should have this up on Capitol Hill just when you walk in. Like, hey, and every politician just tap it with their hands when it's like that. Like that should be the morning affirmation. I mean, yeah, but it's just hard. It's just hard. And then you factor in real world events and we have
Hmm.
adversarial states around, or in the world, and you get all this complexities. But I think what's, if listeners are, can, again, because I'm going to give you my quote, it's going to end it a little bit pessimistically, but I think it applies to our politicians, but I think every one of us can adhere, like the U.S. citizen around the world, really. But I'm just, I just say U.S. because we reference our political system a lot in this dialogue. But these 8 principles, the people can, adhere to these 8 principles every day. I mean, we should start. And like you said before, we're not going to be perfect. We're going to fail, but get back on the horse and be like, oh, wait a minute, I was having more of a debate, not a dialogue. And what I like about your background is it's given you're not a politician, you're not a lawyer, I mean,
No,
how get healing families, I think I'm just going to summarize what I think you do. I hope you don't disagree with that statement, but I mean, what a way to bring people together in the most complex possible environment is family, right? And that's got to transition to our political system. You would think almost easier because they're adults, but not really. So
politics is much more difficult.
yeah, you're right. I guess, yeah, but anyway, again, like I said, these principles are a rock solid. And when did the book come out, by the way?
Book came out in just around Thanksgiving.
Okay, cool. And where can folks get it?
You can get it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble.
Okay,
It's harder to get in bookstores. So
sure. Okay,
online is
yeah,
the best
I'll
way to get
include the links in the
it.
show notes so folks can
Yeah,
find it that way.
yeah.
Um, Very cool. So, all right. So I'm going to read you. I'm going to get your. It's a little bit redundant, but I think, like I said, I. It's a new thing I'm trying to do. Is I go through someone's material and I kind of just try to think through how would I quantify my position or my concern or my summarize what we just talked about. So here goes. I want to get your opinion on this. So, all right, let me put it here. All right. So, given our current political landscape, while we may agree in theory that being empathetic to the perspective of the opposing side is just, our 2-sided political system will ultimately force us to pull the lever for our side come voting day, pulling us through cognitive dissonance to simplify our complex views into a binary choice.
Mhm.
Sigh. This reality, along with our inherent tribal nature, inevitably causes us to pick a side, and even the most well meaning among us inevitably see the opposing side as the other and convince ourselves that we are more righteous than them. Tell me I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. That's what
I,
I see. That's what I see the challenge. You know, what do you think
so
about that?
I would agree with everything except the last few words. Yes, we have to make a binary choice. There are 2 candidates, there are 2 parties. I have my opinions as to which party is better for our country and will improve the lives of more people in our country than the other party in most of the ways that are important to me. That's how I make my choice, right? I listen to each candidate or each party and say which candidate will do more to improve the lives of people in our society um, uh, than the other side, and I make my choice. Um, and so, and of course, we have to do that. Um, but and yes, we are tribal, but um, we don't have to, in all case, say that my tribe is always right. So the idea that you said that the others we are more righteous than the other side is taking it to another level. To say that we have better ideas and better solutions or even better values. Okay, I can say better values. Um, but there is this tendency that people call basically gravity, right? That if we go with um, Democrats on one position, then we tend to go to Democrats on other positions. There's a gravitational pull, and if the same policy is proposed by the other side, we're going to disagree with it,
Right. Oh
right?
yeah. See
So
it all the
we
time. Yeah.
can make an effort. I say this in the book. We can make an effort to defy gravity and to say that at this moment, this political party or this candidate, I think, is going to do better in all the ways that are important to me
Hmm.
for our country, um, and um, but this is my judgment at this moment.
Mm. Yeah. Well, yeah, I would love most of that not to be true. I just see that's where the kind of things are going, and like you said, the 42% thing earlier, and it's like, oh man. So, but these conversations, and I think, like I said, the principles you lay out, I think there's hope. I just think we all should. I think we all need to recognize it's just. I don't think the way things are going, the default is kind of going is not kind of it
Yeah,
is going in the
yeah,
wrong direction. And
yeah,
then you add social media and the
yeah.
incentive structures of what social media is all about, clicks, the race to the bottom of the brain stem. I've done a lot of conversations on that on the podcast. And, if it bleeds, it leads, just putting more things in front of you that you want to see, not necessarily, that kind of, and then you add AIs coming with deep fakes, and we're not going to know what's real and what's not. I have concerns. I have a lot of
Yeah.
concerns there, you know, but anyway, Ken, this was fun. I enjoyed it. I really did. I really,
Well,
really
thank
did.
you for having me. I've enjoyed it too.
Yeah, this was a lot of
And
fun.
I appreciate that you're interested, and what you're
Yeah.
doing in this podcast is uh, an antidote to what you're concerned about, right?
Yeah.
Having
Amen. Yeah, exactly. No, I appreciate that.